Michael!
Woo!
Is there a Michael on there?
We don't have a picture of Michael, but we do have a picture to show.
Yeah.
We asked Michael if there was anything special that we should say to introduce him, and he said no. So, some ordinary things about Michael. He's a human being. He has 2 eyes. He likes food, and I believe, I could be wrong about this, but I believe most nights he sleeps. Ish.
Yeah.
So those are some incredibly ordinary things about Michael, and he will share more of the extraordinary things, like his talent for storytelling. And also, if you haven't had the opportunity to hear Michael before, you may just want to zip out to the back table out there and pick up one of these, because you may need it. This is the first time that I heard Michael speak in Belfast. Stevan is wearing his Belfast t-shirt, proudly there. This is when Trisha, Scott, and I first heard Michael speak. Yeah, real-time evidence there. So, again, if you haven't heard him share stories of our people and their lives, then just grab a napkin, something really absorbent, a sleeve, a neighbor's sleeve. So we welcome up here to the front, Michael.
Michael, yes.
That's a great introduction. One thing that wasn't said is I'm not a morning person. Amber, my fiance, when she waking up is like the switch of a light, you know? She opens her eyes and she's awake. For me, waking up is like sleep is ice. It has to melt off me. And I have yet to thaw. Just to let you know. I also want to just appreciate one more time, gosh, I hate getting choked up. Damia, your films have been amazing. And I've had his job. And I gotta tell you, it is so hard. Because not only do you have to film the whole day that everybody experiences, but once the day ends, you have to start editing all that footage. And then get the deliverable by the time they wake up. So, the first night he went to bed at 3:30, and then was in the room before anybody to set up his camera again. And you've done this nice thing of, probably some of you recognize the songs, but if you're not from L'Arche, at least the first 2, I know one was by Wyndham and one was by John Coleman. Those are songs that are original compositions composed out of the L'Arche life. So you've really brought this beautiful... And I don't know if you know, but there's a distinction between the internet and the World Wide Web. So later in the story it was, well, then I called the inventor of the World Wide Web, ... So the caliber of thinkers we're in the presence of is quite remarkable. I don't know how you did this, Jen. Okay, this is a photograph of Amber and I, who made the As I Am series. For those of you who saw me present it, oh, thanks. And this was when we shot our last film for the series, the 12th episode. So we were just about to pack up, and those sticky notes you see all over the wall, that was what became the film. So the film First Waltz, which I showed 2 nights ago, it always begins with sticky notes. Amber and I had the chance to spend between 4 to 6 weeks in all the blue pin drop countries. And then with work in peace building and conflict transformation stuff, I've also had the great joy of working with people with disabilities in the yellow pin drop countries. Those are called pin drops. But I'd rather actually today speak with the language of social sciences. So I do a lot of reading in the world of disability studies. Amber studied anthropology, so because of her, it sort of infused my world. And we've always approached things through the lens of art. So we're always in search of beauty. And that's probably our biggest obligation when we arrive in a place. That said, I'm not an expert at all, unlike Pamela and Yinta. So everything that I say, it mostly just comes from the fact that I love thinking about this stuff deeply. But I'm not a card-carrying voice of these things. But I also think that's okay. And there's this beautiful quote by Edward Said, who was a scholar and a founder of post-colonial studies. And he was talking about the importance of amateurism. And he said, the particular threat to the intellectual today is an attitude which I shall call professionalism. Not rocking the boat, not straying outside the accepted paradigms or limits, making yourself marketable above all. ... The antidote to this, the way this attitude can be countered, is by aspiring towards amateurism. The desire to be moved not by profit or reward, but by the love for and unquenchable interest in the larger picture, in making connections across lines and barriers, in refusing to be tied down to a specialty, in caring for ideas and values despite the restrictions of your profession. Amateurism, literally, is an activity fueled by care and affection, rather than profit. And he says that the word amateur comes from the word which means to love. So I would like to say, as a caveat, I'm certainly not an expert, but I am pretty proud to be an amateur. Now, here's a painting of Isaac Newton. And this was in the 1600s. It was a pretty pivotal moment. Until this moment, pretty much the whole world thought that white light was a pure and divine and uniform thing. And in this moment, Isaac Newton discovered that actually white light consists of a spectrum of colors. So in a way, it was a unity without uniformity. What do I mean? What I'm going to be talking about is L'Arche across the Federation. And when we say L'Arche, we're just saying one word. It's like one beam of light. But when you open up that spectrum, you see that actually there is a unity, but it's not uniform at all. So this is going to be a journey into that spectrum. And the other thing that I want to say to begin is, how many of you guys know the story of the blind monks and the elephant? This is an old sacred tale. And the blind monks go up to the elephant, and one puts the hand on the buttocks of the elephant and says, "Oh, it's a mortar." And another puts the hand on the tail of the elephant and says, "Oh, it's a pestle." And another holds the leg and says, "It's a tree trunk." The truth is, although we did get to visit all these countries and we spent so much time with people, at the end of the day, when I'm talking about L'Arche, I'll be just grabbing onto a leg, But hopefully it'll give us all a picture of what the actual animal looks like. And in this room, if we all are having conversations throughout, I know we can start to understand better what that is. So if I have time, we'll see how far I get. I want to address the questions of what did I see as the common strengths across L'Arche? And what did I see as the common weaknesses or the challenges that we face? And this is a little bit old, this data, but we did at least 173 formal interviews, each of about an hour, with people in L'Arche, in 6 continents and in 11 languages. And we filmed about 1,108 hours of footage, and we reviewed all of that footage over and over and over again. So this is our data set in a certain regard of what we're relying on. Let's go into the common. Wow, I wish I had that energy. I bracketed the L'Arche strengths into 2 categories. And the first category is this idea that all lives matter. But I want to say that when we say that all lives matter, there is a little bit of nuance. So I thought this comment was pretty good. The two guys talking says, well, I think that all lives matter. We should care exactly equally at all times about everything. And then you see he's got a fire hose. One house is on fire. One house is not on fire. And he's pouring the water on the house that's not on fire. So we do say that all lives matter, but the truth is we have a preference for the houses that are on fire. And that doesn't mean, that could mean whatever it means, but we do have a preference for the houses that are on fire. And lastly, in large, this is what I'm going to begin with, all deaths matter too. All deaths matter too. Yeah, I'll explain it. So one of the things across the board, in every country I went to that was true, is that if, for example, there was a commandment, like the 11th commandment, honor thy hospital's visiting hours, L'Arche would burn in hell. We are visiting our anarchists. We have too many people that invade the hospital room with too many instruments, making too much noise. We drive hospitals crazy. Craig from Australia, who passed away shortly after we made the film in Australia, we were in touch with their community and the stories of how all the nurses were saying, who is this man? Because he had a constant flow of visitors. I was talking to Ben from Cuise-la-Motte, and he said the same thing. The hospital knows when L'Arche is there. Right here, Françoise Leblanc, I had a great pleasure of living with Françoise. In fact, it was back in 2007. Jean Vanier told Françoise's story in Washington, D.C., and I was in the room, and I heard that story, and that's when I decided to join L'Arche. I ended up getting to live with Françoise in the last years of her life. And she was turning 70. It was her 69th birthday. As assistants, we gathered as many of the names of old assistants as we could and their contacts. And we sent out letters and emails to invite them to her 70th birthday. And we prepared for a long time. And you know what? She died 4 days before her birthday. But you know what? Everybody still came. And so you had this incredible funeral. And Françoise had never said a word in her life. And she couldn't walk, and she couldn't see, she couldn't hear. And yet, her personality was huge. It was so big that all these people around Europe and North America flew in and had countless stories over the next day or weekend at her funeral. It was remarkable. Another example, when we were in L'Arche, Argentina, the woman who was the head of the workshop, who now I think is the community leader, Barbie. They called her Barbie. It's Barbara. Barbie kind of sounds funny to Anglophones, but her father would volunteer in the workshop every Wednesday, and just for like 2 hours. And he got cancer and was in a coma. And we were in the workshop, and you could feel the weight. We were filming, and all of a sudden, we're not getting any smiles. And there's a really bad feeling of, wow, do people hate this workshop? And I'm told, well, no, actually, this is the day that Barbie's father would volunteer, but he's in a coma. And so Barbie said, you know what, let's call him. So they called her father, and I'm not joking, I mean, this is so crazy. They all were talking to him on the phone. I forget who it was in their family that was holding the phone up to his ear. And apparently his vitals leveled out for the first time in days. And, well, he did pass away, but it was this incredible moment where everyone thought, okay, he hears us. He knows that we're thinking about him, that we're with him in this moment. And I made a film about Bapi from India, but when it comes to driving hospitals crazy, Bobby was in a hospital and he was told after a spinal surgery, well, first he was told, you need a spinal surgery, but there's no way you can afford it. So Lars reached out to all the old assistants who had money, even if it was like $1, add money. We're not very greedy, Lars, we're needy. and told them, Bobby needs this spinal surgery. And all this stuff poured in, and they found 3 doctors who were willing to do it pro bono as long as the surgery room could be rented. And they performed a spinal surgery that they thought was impossible in Bobby. And then they said, well, he'll never walk again. But while he was in the hospital, he was really determined. And when nurses were on their lunch break, and he'd kind of grab them and start talking to them, and they would never be able to get away because he'd just engage them, and he'd win them over, and then he'd get them to help him walk. And he slowly built this world around him until 1, he learned to walk, which no one thought he would be able to do. And 2, when he left the hospital, he had to stop at every floor. It was like a 12-floor hospital to say goodbye to everyone. And they were all really sad, which is kind of the irony of it. Like, you need him out of the hospital. But, so that's an example of, driving hospitals crazy until, the Stockholm Center, they love you. There's this great quote from L'Arche, France. They have this initiative called Citez-moi, where they've been collecting over 50 years all the great quotes that have emerged. And one of them was, "Tu viendras à mort? Are you coming to my death?" rather than to my birthday. And apparently the person who says this, that's their barometer for a relationship. Are you coming to my death? And I've been to a lot of funerals where there's not many people in the church. And it's really hard. But L'Arche's answer to that question is clearly a resounding yes. Now, I will say, when you're a long-term assistant, unfortunately, I've seen that it's not exactly the same. It might not be as resounding. So that's definitely a bad double standard. But that's not always the case. And this is an example. Joe Child from L'Arche Daybreak, who I was making a film with, and he passed away in the middle of the film. He had said he wanted his casket painted. And there's a long story behind this. And if you grab me afterwards, I can tell you the story. It's very beautiful. But everybody came and they painted his casket. And this was a tradition that L'Arche Daybreak has had with a few people. And so he has this beautiful painted casket with all the memories and quotes. And they just had paintbrushes around and anyone could come and paint on the casket. And at his funeral, he was a woodworker. He helped build their woodworking shop. And he had built that kayak that you see. And he wanted that to be the first thing processed down the aisle. I think it was like a 14-foot or 16-foot kayak. And everyone brought it down. And actually it was really beautiful. Liska gave the eulogy. And all she did is she just gave all the nicknames that people had for Joe. She didn't give a speech. She just said, well, we called Joe this. And then the person who coined the nickname stood up and explained why. And she said, we called Joe this. So funerals are a really good thing. And we might think that that's a given. But it's not a given. Here's a photograph from the Huronia Regional Center. These are graves of people with disabilities with serial numbers on them. And this is 100 kilometers from L'Arche Daybreak, where you have the painted casket that I just described. I'm from the US, and I've been working on a documentary in Georgia. And here's a shot that my cinematographer took of a similar place in Georgia called Milledgeville State Hospital. It's about 100 miles from L'Arche, Atlanta. And there's 25,000 people that were buried with serial numbers. Again, maybe you think that's from the past. This is a guy named Nick Papadopoulos. I was with him the day Jean Vanier died. Nick's been locked in a nursing home for 2.5 years. He used to be an independent living activist. That was his job. He helped people find homes to live independently. He got a bed sore. He was hospitalized. He wasn't able to pay his rent because he was in the hospital for 2 weeks, so he was evicted. The hospital said, well, we can't send you out to the streets, so let's just send you to a nursing home. You just got to go there for one night, and then we'll find something for you. He gets to the nursing home. All right, you just need to sign on the dotted line. He signs on the dotted line. That was 2.5 years ago. He's been trying everything to get out, but once you've been institutionalized in the system, it's so hard in the state of Georgia. And here's a quote that he told me from his interview. Well, let me just explain too. He wears the patient gown. And he's worn that for 2.5 years because he says, I refuse to wear human clothes until they treat me like a human. And so when government inspectors come, they try to get him to put on clothes so it'll look good. And he says, no, I won't put on the clothes. I'm going to wear the gown. So he said to me, this would not have happened if my mom was alive. My mom would have been like, we're going to break my son out. We're going to tie him to the truck and get him out. I don't care what we have to do. And then he told me, what's it like in a nursing home? It's kind of like if you were erased. Everything that you are as a person in the real world is no more. So if you were a doctor, a lawyer, or an architect, or a teacher, that's stripped away. Well, you're not going to be that anymore. You're going to be this. Just a patient. Patient zero. So it's not a given, right? So we need to drive hospitals crazy. I'm going to skip that next slide. Another thing that I saw across the board in L'Arche, and this is something we don't say very often because we're about the little path. We're not about beating our chests. And anyway, too many people have messianic complexes to begin with in the field of humanities, or not humanity, of humanitarian work. Maybe humanities too. I don't know. This is the morning. But the truth is, having interviewed all these people, L'Arche is a movement that saves lives.
I'm Marianne.
Don't worry about it. I'm Marianne. Here's an example. Kababa, who I lived with in L'Arche, Kenya, when he was born, his parents didn't quite know how to honor his dignity. His sister, who didn't have Down syndrome, was allowed to sleep with the family. Kababa was made to sleep with the goats his whole life. He never learned human language until the age of 18. And he came to L'Arche, Kenya, and for the first time at the L'Arche, Kenya table, began to speak with people. His first word in his language was he named himself. And he named himself Kababa, which means little father. Then he began to name everybody else. And he would observe something about you, and then you'd get a name eventually. So the community leader has size 14 shoes. So he was Wamagato, the one of the big feet. One of the assistants always brought the milk in the morning, so he was the one with the milk. A very unfortunate event was there was a new assistant who accidentally farted at the table. And from then on, she was Watui, which, depending on how you translate it, is either the one of farts or the one of sharts. And something really interesting about Kababa's language is there's no actual word for a yes. He says no all the time, but there's no word for a yes. But he will communicate yes, but he didn't give yes a word. But he certainly gave no a word. But that's an example of someone's life who's been saved in L'Arche. And in Honduras, Amber and I had the great joy of meeting Santos and Pipe. And if you've seen the film from Honduras, Santos was on the street with worms in his elbow when a random person walked up, kind of a hippie person probably. I don't know her personally, Nadine. But she said, we're going to start a L'Arche home. Would you like to be the founder? And he said, yeah. And that was 30 years ago. And every day, actually, Santos prays for the leadership of L'Arche. which was kind of surprising. At first I was like thinking, oh, is he kind of a suck-up? You know? No, I don't know. A little pessimistic view there. But no, the more I got to know him, the more I realized that he just thinks, I know it's hard for these guys, what they're doing, and they better not stop. Right? Like all these meetings that we're in, and you're thinking, why am I here? I came to L'Arche not for the meetings. But we better not stop having those meetings. And Pipe, who's right next to Santos, he had been abandoned by his mother. His father had been jailed because he cut off somebody's arm. He was a butcher. He was good at that, I guess. And so an ironic thing, Pipe, really lost touch with his mom. And years later, I don't know if it was 20 years later, his mom got in a car accident. And she ended up getting a similar disability that was acquired to Pipe's. But she couldn't get access to medicine, because hers wasn't developmental and Pipe was in L'Arche and she wasn't. And so he actually eventually reconciled with her. And one of the assistants found out he was taking his medicine and then hiding it and giving it to his mom, because it was the same medicine. And she was the one who had left him. It's not just people with disabilities who are saved by L'Arche. There's thousands of stories of those of us who aren't carrying the label of disability in the same way, whose lives have been changed by L'Arche. Here's Craig in L'Arche, Belfast. They have a farm-to-table catering company. They do the farming, they do the catering. They do everything from really high-end events with the mayor of Belfast, all the way down to twice a week, I think it's twice a week, maybe 3 times. They go to a soup kitchen. And Craig here was down on his luck, and he was going to the soup kitchen as a beneficiary. And kept thinking, who are these chefs? Because they're having an amazing time. And eventually he ended up joining L'Arche. And there's a number of people who have gone through that path, one of who then became a sous chef in the catering company. Craig ended up marrying a L'Arche assistant, which is another thing that we don't advertise in L'Arche, but it's an incredible dating service. I can't tell you how many people have told us that they're L'Arche couples. There's a lot of things, even, like a dating service. We're probably the largest global network of candle makers in the world. A language school. We met a lot of Germans in Argentina who were there learning Spanish. Yeah. So here's the sous chef. There was I know, right? I didn't take that photo. But I heard this story. Here's another Liska story. University of Toronto, there were 2 students. They were dating. The girl asked the guy, just when they're trying to get to know each other, she said, so if you were to have a child with a disability, what would you do? And he said, terminate the pregnancy. And they started having this huge fight. So that's happening over here. Over here, someone from L'Arche, Liska, was asked to give a speech at the University of Toronto, but there was a snowstorm. And she said, okay, I don't really know if I could go, I don't know if anyone's going to be there, who's going to go listen to this talk. Anyway, she went. There were maybe a few people that came. She just talked about L'Arche. 10 years later, she's in a L'Arche community. Growing.
Yeah.
And she's preparing the food, and there's an assistant in the community who's also preparing the food. She thinks, wow, this guy's a really good assistant. And he says, I know who you are. And she said, really? I feel like I've never seen you before. He goes, well, I listened to a talk that you gave 10 years ago during a snowstorm. And she said, what? He said, my girlfriend and I had an argument. I said I'd terminate a pregnancy if there was a child with a disability. She said, there's a talk about L'Arche. I want you to go to it. We went to it. And changed my mind. So he's been an assistant there. He just goes, not a full-time assistant, he just goes, prepares a meal once a week. 10 10 years. She never knew. Another story from London, Ontario. You know, the waiting list for a kidney is between 4 to 6 years in Ontario. It's the longest waiting list of any province to get a kidney. There's an assistant who needed a kidney transplant.
Chris, he's in the room.
All right, there we go. So Chris, you can tell us.
Now we have the microphone.
Yeah.
Yeah, so her name is Joanna. Joanna is the woman who welcomed me to lunch. She is why I'm here today, 12 years ago. And she was my house leader for 6 years. And I moved to the Maritimes, and I found out that she was sick, and she needed a kidney. I said, yeah, for sure, I'll do the testing. And we were a complete perfect match. And this took place in October of last year. I went down to Ontario, and we finalized everything, and we had the surgery. And today she's back to work. Yeah, so, yeah, I guess that's it in a nutshell, yeah.
But I mean, honestly, like, what, where do you hear that, you know? And I heard that there were, you know, several people who were offering their kidneys, you know? It also, when we talk about saving lives, it also has to do with saving the inner life, too. It's not just about organ transplants. I had in the film about Australia these really harrowing statistics from a 2012 census report. Let's see, does it go? No, it doesn't, so I'll just do it like this. Oh, can I zoom in? No. There we go. So the statistics said that 84% of Australian adults with disabilities that were living independently, hadn't received a visit from a friend or loved one in 3 months. 59% hadn't received a phone call in 3 months. And 18% had no social contact with another human in 3 months. But it was another human who was not paid to be with them. So trying to defy the loneliness statistic, this photograph we've got now, that's now a Canadian assistant. She was in Marsh, Australia at the time. She's in Stratford now. And she's with Louise. And Louise had just joined the community, and Marsh, Australia has this annual thing called Remember, Celebrate, and Dream. So the members of the community remember how their year was, they celebrate what went well, and they dream about what they want next. And Amber and I were filming it, and Louise was smiling and talking and singing, and her parents had never seen her do that so frequently with such zest, and they were just blown away that her loneliness had been overcome. I was interviewing Andre in Ukraine, and Andre refused to answer any of my questions because I have a beard. And so he kept telling me, shave your beard, and then I'll answer your questions. And I told him, I'm not going to shave my beard. You don't have to answer my questions, but I'd like you to. And then he said, well, you know what, I've got a question for you. And I said, okay. And he said, how are you going to help me? Because I'm caring for my mother. And when she dies, I go to the institution. And I found out later, the statistic, that 50% of people that go into institutions in Ukraine, no matter how healthy they were, within 2 years die. So I actually don't know what Larsh has. I haven't followed up with Andre. I'm not sure what's happened, but I know that this was at the forefront of of the communities concerned, and they're trying to solve this problem for all the people that they could. So I mentioned Françoise, who we called Mamie, and here's me back in 2009 and Françoise. Now I said she lived until she was 69. Apparently, the other person, the longest year that someone with her disability had lived, except for her, was in the 40s. So a doctor told us that she's only alive because she's a real fighter and she's got a team fighting. Which brings me to another thing. L'Arche is a place that's dedicated to proving medical experts wrong. And if you just think about the fact that in 1959, the average life expectancy of someone with Down syndrome was 9 years old. So that was, 5 years before L'Arche started. In 1984, the life expectancy was 25. By 2012, the average was between 47 and 60. They haven't had a new census. But all the while, L'Arche has had an army of people pushing the boundaries. And I was told that the oldest living person with Down syndrome lives in a large community in Canada. I don't know who it is, but someone told me that. And I've also heard many similar things in different communities in different countries around the world. There's a nice story too from whoever. Is anybody here from L'Arche Sudbury? Yeah? Okay. So I was giving this presentation to the head of your guys' board and a few other people, and she pulled me aside and she said, our community's doctor is retiring this year, and she said, what are you going to do? And he said, well, I want to live a long life, so I'll probably try to join L'Arche. So you guys are the healthiest, longest living patients that I've had. I thought that was really a nice testament. Another thing that I've seen across the board that L'Arche is really dedicated to is wasting time at tables. And in a world where everything is about being faster and the cult of speed, L'Arche is really dedicated to protecting that value of time wasted at table. And I hyphenated it as if it was like one thing. But ultimately what that amounts to is it's a preservation of our relational rights. Trying to defend our relational rights. And here's a nice little example I found. What did the sugar say to the coffee? No. What did the coffee say to the sugar? What did the coffee say to the sugar? You're trembling?
No, le dijo.
No, it said.
Sin fin mi vida, voy a amar.
Without you, my life is bitter. Did you get it? Bitter. Without you, my life, without you, is bitter. The sea? Water? Why doesn't the ocean dry up? Because it doesn't have towels. So that happens every day. Every one in the community, except for Pipe, knows the answer to all of those riddles. But Pipe finds it really tough, which is why Santos likes to tell them to Pipe. So, Amber and I filmed that exchange, and it goes on for like an hour. But it's all about wasting time together. In L'Arche, Egypt, when it's time for tea, which happens several times a day, they get out 25 glasses, like glass mugs, but they're all glass mugs. And then you see them, 1, 2, 1, 2.5. This is of sugar. 1, 2, 3, 4.5. And they do it to all the cups. Everyone has memorized exactly how much sugar everyone else wants. If you were to ask someone, how many sugars do you want? They would be mortified. It would be so offensive. Do you not know me? How could you ask me how many sugars in my tea? Have we not lived in community for this long? And I was just stunned. Amber and I were amazed because it's not an easy order with all these people, but everybody knows exactly how many sugars. You know, sometimes it's a half, sometimes it's a quarter. It's usually about 4. In L'Arche, Honduras, people would wait for the tortillas to come before we'd eat the meal. Food would be ready, but the tortillas come from around the corner. And there's like a woman who prepares the tortillas. And if she's run out, then you go to the next corner. If she's run out, you go to the next corner. Nobody begins eating until the tortillas arrive. And Amber and I were really suffering. We'd be really hungry. We're like, we don't need tortillas to eat our meal. And they're like, it's not a meal until the tortillas are here. And, but anyway, in the process of waiting, you'd have all these great conversations, you know. And Abel, I have a photo of him because he was the most tenacious tortilla waiter, as in waiting for tortillas. He waited once an entire morning, skipped work. They never arrived, so he didn't eat breakfast. His plate was right in front of him the whole time. And then at lunch they arrived, so he ate both breakfast and lunch with the tortillas. We also had some great times when the power went out, Amber and I and the community, because we would have nothing else to do but to just invent games. L'Arche, Japan, is Manami-san here? No, you're here. Okay, good. So I'm trying to remember if I got these names right. Is Hitoshi-san the one in the corner? Oh, Zumi-san. Ah, okay. And then is Ito-san the really tall one? Okay, so Ito-san. So Zumi-san and Ito-san. When it comes to washing dishes, this is, I really wanted to film this, but I didn't get a chance to. Azumi-san, who's photographed right here, he's really, sorry to say this, the nice way to put it would be like laissez-faire. The mean way to put it would be lazy. When he's drying a dish, he just touches it once with a towel. Maybe there's one bead of water that's absorbed, and it's finished. And he's pretty short. And then the next one in line is Ito-san. And Ito-san is kind of, I mean, if we were to use pathological language, which I shouldn't use, obsessive compulsive. Every bead, absolutely every bead. And then even when you don't see any beads of water and you think it's ready to put on the rack, he'll insist on continuing. So they've been paired up oftentimes to dry the dishes because it's really a complementary relationship. But it takes time. Not everybody likes wasting time at the table. And I'll give you an example here. Alan from L'Arche, Kenya. This is another tough story. A lot of the stories from L'Arche, Kenya, everyone who's in the community has a really rough backstory. Because their dignity wasn't honored before they came to the community. So Alan was really young and had a developmental disability. For some reason the police got hold of him, I think when he was around between 4 and 6, and they put him in jail. And so he lived in jail until he came to L'Arche. So the relationship that he knew was, prisoner, prison guard. He didn't know, friend, brother, sister. Maybe he knew mother, father, but if he did, we're not quite sure. So now he comes from jail. You can imagine how regulated that world is. To eat a meal with us at L'Arche, to see if he wants to join L'Arche. Now, L'Arche tables are crazy, right? I mean, Toinette at Jean Vanier's funeral was throwing oranges at people because that's a tradition, and she hit the main camera on that was televising. You have a good arm. But we would do that in L'Arche, Kenya, except we'd use cups, actually. We'd throw cups at each other, but don't worry, they're kind of like rubbery and they have been bought for that purpose. But Alan would never speak without raising his hand. So he's sitting next to Musa, and Musa's laughing, and Musa's saying all these things, and then Alan raises his hand. He said, it's bad manners to speak without raising your hand. I'm like, Alan, but it's also okay to... Well, anyway, Alan really did not like wasting time at the table. After about... I forget how long it was, actually, but it was quite a while. One day, we spent about 45 minutes at least of every day dancing in L'Arche, Kenya. It's just what we do, or what we did. I don't know if they still do it, but Alan would always sit down and look pretty miserable. And then one day he stood up. And we were all dancing. And he started to go like this. And we thought, oh my gosh, wait, is this a dance? It looks kind of musical. And so we started going like this too. Because it's generally how we do it. Like someone picks the choreography and we all follow them. So we're all going like this. And he starts to go like this. So we all start going like this. And then his hands go out. So our hands go out, like, oh my gosh, she is dancing. And then the move, which became a trademark and is super famous with anybody who's been enlarged. And then back. So the Allen move now, for anyone who wants to know, it starts like here. Goes to here. And yeah. Okay, starts right here. Goes to here. The hips. But it's got to be done with a really like scary looking serious face. And an occasional crack of a smile. Where they write all their favorite quotes that emerge at the table. And these were some of the really good ones. Jim here, who you see in the photograph, was asked, okay, we're going to sing a song before the meal. What do you want to sing? He said, This Little Light. I said, what light? He said, Bud Light. There was another one where they were watching the weather, and all of a sudden, he got really angry, and he said, I hate farmers. He cursed. He said, damn, I hate farmers. And everybody said, I know. People in the room said, what do you mean? He said, they pray for rain. Sorry about that. The hate speech. But yeah, it made the quote board though. It's notable. Another thing that I've seen across the board is the issue of employment. So the World Health Organization calculated that about 80%, there's an 80% unemployment rate when it comes to people with disabilities. Now, L'Arche hasn't, as far as I know, hasn't calculated its employment rate. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was the opposite. Employment is a really big thing in L'Arche. I want to give you another example from L'Arche, Japan. L'Arche, Japan has a really flourishing workshop, and they make soap. And they actually built the soap factory by hand. Like they built the factory by hand, and then the tools. And there was a certain point in their history where they began to sell so much soap, they were self-sustaining, which is kind of the goal of most nonprofits, right? That's every board wants to reach that day. And when they reached that point, they said, oh, now we can employ people who might not be hired in the local area. And so they started employing people who would be less efficient, and they therefore made themselves no longer self-sustaining. But for them, it wasn't about a narcissistic economy. It was about the economy of gift. It was about creating a place where people could contribute. And I thought that was a really powerful thing. I mentioned Root Soup. The way that Root Soup was created, Root Soup was the catering company in Northern Ireland. The way it was created was it Jill? Jill. Maria? Garvey. Okay. Maria Garvey asked Jill, if you could have any job, what would you want? And she said, kind of masochistically, I'd like to cut onions. Not really quite know why anybody would want that as a job. So, so then Maria tried to think, how could we make this happen? And she found out that there was a homeless center which had an industrial kitchen that wasn't being used. So she said, hey, we'll cook for you guys. You let us use the kitchen as a place that we could run a business. And that's how they actually started the catering company. So building a job around what people want to do. Well, I guess I'll tell this one because this is kind of fun. So George Beatty, he was the unofficial coach of a hockey team of musicians who called themselves the Gustav Mahlers. Did anybody get the pun? No. I love puns. Okay. Well, anyway, he was, just to say that work is not always just about work. It is about employment, but it's also about contribution, right? And I thought this was a great example. George, apparently I heard stories, he would always go to their practice, and sometimes they could only get ice time at like 2 in the morning. And so he would walk supposedly like a mile. I don't know if it gets longer with as long as the story's told. I've heard as much as like 3 miles. And he'd show up, and everyone would wait for him. And he'd say this every time: all right, now all I want you to do is to play fair and don't try anything dirty. And after that, everyone could begin. And apparently there was a day when like they had an actual game, and the coach was there, but George wasn't there. And they refused to begin. Because they said, our coach isn't here. We can't start. This is another story. Geisho. So in northern Uganda, there was a war that was a very difficult civil war. And the position of people with disabilities was also very tough in this community. And I won't go into the details, but basically infanticide was practiced systematically. And so there was a group of 211 mothers who refused to kill their children with disabilities, and who were, as a result, isolated by the rest of the community. They were not allowed to touch other children. They were not allowed to get hired for work. And so they reached out to Larsh Kenya to give a workshop. Of course, Larsh Kenya said, well, we have nothing. What can we say to them? We have no idea what to say. But we tried for 3 days to give this workshop to try and give them some hope and some encouragement. And we also worked with government officials in the area for 3 days. After the conference, people filled out surveys of what stood out to them. And more than anything, more than any of the talks, more than any of the eloquent moments, the mother said it was when Geisho from Larsh Kenya stood in front of everyone. He held up a candle and he said, I made this. They had never seen an adult with a disability who had made something as a job. This was in 2011. So across the Federation, people are dealing with very different points in the history of progress when it comes to employment.
Everyone has talent too.
Exactly. Well, yeah, Geisho's candles were really, really good. Yeah. So that's all under the category of the all lives matter and all deaths too. Then the other category in Larsh that I've seen is category of it's a school of unlearning, of unlearning a lot of things that you think you know. And there's this term. I was watching this talk from a few philosophers, and they were talking about this concept of disruptive kinship. And I really like this, and I just want to have a quick quote here. Judith Butler said, kinship, they're relations that are binding, but they exceed the form of family. So family is but one historic instance of kinship. And why am I mentioning that? The relationship between people in Larsh is hard to define. I remember John Guido telling me once he was walking with a friend of his with a disability, and someone said, who's that? Is that your father? And he said, no, it's my friend. But he said afterwards he felt really bizarre about it, because they were more than friends, but he didn't know what word it was. And I think, I don't know either, but I think chosen kin comes kind of close. A lot of people in Larsh choose to create kinship bonds in a way that disrupts the norms of societies. They say, you people shouldn't be kin. But we say, well, actually we are. I'm going to speed through this. There's tons and tons of examples of first birthdays that have been celebrated in Larsh, of wedding albums that people have taken me through, of godparents who are so proud to be godparents. Lots of stories of familial reconciliation due to the work of L'Arche. Some of those stories are pretty incredible. Let's see, I'll skip that. Let's see, shall I go here? I'll jump to here. Okay. Another thing that's I think really notable about L'Arche is that we have a wealth of inside jokes. And maybe you won't think that's very significant, but you know, now I live in Montreal and I take the metro to work every day. And it's my first time taking the metro to work every day. So I'm just one in the anonymous flood every morning. And I look around and I think, you know, I try not to look at people because I feel like I'm not supposed to. But I often think, how many inside jokes does everybody have? And people in L'Arche, you know, we have a lot. Our relationality can be measured by how many inside jokes. And I've heard so many inside jokes. Here's one with Joe Child. He had a running joke. Trying to remember, was it Gordy Henry, who would always tell him, "I'm going to go on a date with your wife." And that lasted for a really long time. He actually did go on a date with Joe's wife. Kathy, his wife, told me about it. George Beatty, who I mentioned before, this isn't exactly an inside joke, but it's something similar, like philosophically. He passed away a while ago. That cane in the back of the photograph, if you can see, there's a cane on a hook. It's still there. Everybody's kept the cane there. And it's an inside knowledge. It's an inside something, you know. All the shifting of the house, people come and go, but the cane remains. Let's see. Another one, Peter Porter. He has a cat on his tombstone. And Lori laughs because she might know the story behind the cat. But the cat is an inside joke. And in order to know it, you got to talk to the long-term assistants. But they'll tell you why there's a cat there. And it's this long-running inside joke. This was me as an assistant. And my house leader made the mistake of letting me and some of my housemates stay in her house while she was out of town. So we left her this photograph. I'm a real book nerd, so I covered myself in books. Kieran's an Irishman, so we gave him all the liquor. And Mika is a real foodie, so yeah. But anyway, that's one of our jokes. And another thing that I've seen across the board is L'Arche is a place where people's language is liberated. Now, there's lots of problems with language, even the way that I'm speaking about things right now. And I don't know how to solve them. But it's also a place where language is liberated. I'll just give you a few examples. Luca here, who's playing the guitar, he translated the Lord of the Rings into a symbolic language so that one of the members of L'Arche could read it. It took him several years. He just did it for fun. It wasn't like with a publishing company or anything. He just really he knew she wanted to read it. And L'Arche Italy uses that language when they make films. In the L'Arche Belfast meeting, that was some years ago, when we had, what was it, how many years ago? 2 years ago? Okay, yeah. So, 2 years ago. In our groups, we had to use visual language in our brainstorming, kind of like what's happening on the wall. But we had to, as a form of trying to liberate our conversation to be able to reach new edges and new lines of collaboration and possibility. You're probably thinking, what was that? This was one of the most remarkable things that any of us in L'Arche Kenya had seen. Antigonish had not spoken in 4 years. She was a victim of some things we don't know, she's never said, or maybe she has since I left, but she hadn't at that point, of the violence, the post-election violence in Kenya. And it was so bad that she decided to not speak anymore. She came to the community. We would always try and, get her to speak. And kind of like with Alan, like tease her a little bit and have some fun and loosen up. And then, literally, one night we were all sitting around drinking tea, and Bobo, who was the voice that you heard, was asking her to speak. And then she was like, come on, tell us your name. And then she said, Antigonish, her name. And we lost it. Bobo, she said, wow, but then after that she was like, wah! And then we all ran in, and we always thought her voice would be really high and timid, but it's actually very deep and authoritative. So we also couldn't believe how she sounded. She's got a really dirty mouth, we learned afterwards. Especially when she goes to the dentist, she always curses him out in Turkana, but it's good because he doesn't speak Turkana. But Hani in Egypt, the same thing. He was locked in a room for many years, and when he came out, he refused to speak for 2 years. And his sister was his translator to the world. But after all those years, he began to speak again. I'm going to skip this. This is some philosophical stuff. What to skip, what not to skip? Well, yeah, I'm going to skip. Sorry, guys. Well, let me just mention this. So L'Arche is also a place where I was talking to Jutta yesterday, and she mentioned a term I'd never heard before. She said epistemicize, which is like the destruction of knowledge or knowledges. We were talking about inventions and how when you invent something, you uninvent the past ways of doing it, right? So let's say someone who knows how to weave, like we've got the loom over there, and then you invent a machine, and then a lot of young people won't know the old way of weaving. And I was in the shower this morning, and I was thinking, if you can say epistemicide, you could probably say epistemophilia, which would be the love of knowledges. And then I Googled it, and that was already a word. So. Okay, but L'Arche is a place where we're epistemophiles. Michel Foucault talked about subjugated knowledges, buried knowledges. There's forms of knowing that are very deep, and yet mainstream society does not acknowledge them as forms of knowing. Thanks, Tonette. And L'Arche is a place where that is really explored, where we know and we try to live in a way that says your way of knowing is important to me. And just in a really nice example, Paulo Freire, who was a Brazilian pedagogist, wrote a book called Pedagogy of the Press that he was really famous for. He also wrote a book called Pedagogy of Hope. And he talked about how he went to a group of peasants, that was the language that was used, and they all said, okay, we're waiting to hear you speak. And he said, well, I'm waiting to hear you speak. And they said, well, you're the educated one. You're the one with the knowledge. And he said, okay, let's play a game. He drew, I'm glad. He drew a line down a chalkboard, and he said, I'm going to ask you a question that you can't answer, and then you have to ask me a question that you think I can't answer. So he asked the question, what's the Socratic Maiatuk, which really just means Socratic method, and they're farmers, so they had no idea. Then they asked him, what's a contour curve? He's not a farmer, he had no idea. He asked them, what importance does Hegel have in Marx's thought? They had no idea. They asked him, what's soil lining? He had no idea. And he asked, what's an intransitive verb? They asked, what's a contour curve got to do with erosion? They went back and forth until they both had a score of 10. And then he said, see, I know some things you don't know, you know some things I don't know. And that's how we live, that's how we try to live in L'Arche, no matter who you are. L'Arche, Kenya had an attempt of honoring this. While I was there, we celebrated an actual false graduation where everybody put on gowns and celebrated the forms of knowledges that we have. Could be argued that it's a little bit hokey or maybe a little bit token, but we had an awesome time. All right, now this one I gotta say, I didn't conclude with this. Oh, it's such a shame. I have all the weaknesses that I didn't get to. Those are just as real. Those are just as. I'm just too slow. I also had the common question, which is a great one. But anyway, all right. This one is important to say when I'm in the global north because we're losing hold of this. We're losing hold of this because we're getting too comfortable with things. So the things that I saw across the board, L'Arche is a place of civic courage and non-cooperation. And I want to give you an example. Loïc Kofi, whose name I couldn't pronounce yesterday. I don't know, Toinette's not in the room, so that's good. She kept correcting me. His mother, Camille Kofi, went to Lourdes. You know Lourdes, the pilgrimage site. And her two sons had profound disabilities, and they were not allowed to enter Lourdes. And she was so hurt that she went to Jean. She told Jean. So Jean said, okay, that's simple. We're going to invite every person with disability and their family that we know to invade Lourdes on the same day, and they're not going to be able to refuse us. So that was in 1971. He had 12,000 pilgrims from 18 countries. You can see that photograph. And he gave this incredible speech about how it's not the person who's got the disability, clearly, it's the society. And we need to address that. That's an act of non-cooperation that was very, very important. L'Arche, Egypt, has the first solar-powered home, fully solar-powered home in the country of Egypt. Many people don't know that. It's mostly because they've been refused to be given power consistently from the government. So it's not because they're very, green and hippie. But still, that's a great accomplishment. In Honduras, every Sunday, was it Sunday or Saturday? Okay, on the weekend, there's a radio show that L'Arche runs. And it's an incredible show. They go through all sorts of things. I don't know if you guys remember, but when the Hurricane Katrina hit, there was this really tragic event that happened. There was a hospital called the Memorial Hospital. And Dr. Anna Poe was in charge of the triage. 5 days of torrential rains and a hurricane. They had to decide, what are we going to do? They decided we're going to save, the way they triaged, we're going to save the strongest. And we're going to wait with the weakest. Day before the hurricane ended, they decided, you know what, the weakest probably aren't going to survive. And 23 people with disabilities were found with lethal injections of morphine in their bodies. Had that not been done, the next day they would be alive. Dr. Anna Poe was not convicted. She still practices medicine. It's a very complicated subject. There's a book on it called 5 Days of Memorial. But that was the triage, save the healthiest. You guys saw the film in Ivory Coast. Ivory Coast was the exact opposite. War broke out in their town, and everybody said, until the weakest can be saved, we're not going to leave. So they waited until they could figure out a plan where everybody could be saved from the war at the same time. And they did that. Maurice from L'Arche, Kenya has a very similar story of risking his life in the same way. I use the term weakest, that's not necessarily good. Anyway, save those who are in the most precarious situation, I guess. For example, if you're in a war and you can't run away with your legs, and there's not accessible sidewalks. The first legal case of a chief of police losing to a citizen in a court case was connected to L'Arche in Kenya. So we made legal history. Bapi, as I said, was told he would never walk again. He walked again. In L'Arche, Syria, they never stopped functioning even though the war kept happening and the bombs kept dropping. Kind of a funny story. It's weird to say a funny story, but there was a guy who was walking to the workshop while bombs were dropping. And he arrived at the workshop, and the assistant said, oh my gosh, but you came today. And he said, yeah. He said, but you know there were bombs. And he said, yeah, I know. And the assistant said, well, were you afraid? And the corps member said, yeah, I was afraid. And the assistant said, well, don't you believe in God? And the corpsman said, well, yeah, but I believe in bombs too. So this isn't being romantic. This is a place where they believe in bombs, and yet they're still running the workshop. They're still running the community. Another great example in Larsh, Northern Ireland, there was someone who joined the community who had a lot of struggles with violence. And so it was really hard to live in community life. But they didn't have funding to try and create an independent living situation. So the assistants took a salary pay cut to try and see if they could pay for the rent for 3 months for their friend to test out living individually. I'm not saying you guys got to take pay cuts, but these are acts of civil courage, in my opinion. And these little acts, even though they're very little, I think are very significant. There's a guy, James C. Scott. Pamela Cushing was the one who introduced me to his work. And he's got these great books, but one of them is called Weapons of the Weak. And he talks about small acts that make a big difference. And he says, everyday forms of resistance make no headlines. But just as millions of anthozoan polyps create willy-nilly a coral reef, so too the multiple acts of insubordination and evasion create political and economic barrier reefs. And those barrier reefs can block the ships of the state, he says. But anyway, the ships of oppression. All right, I'm going to skip all this stuff. Harvard, are you intrigued? UN, Lori said, I'm skipping that, I'm sure. And I'm going to skip this. This is, yeah, I'm going to skip that. That's a good one. Jean, oh, sorry, Jean. Okay, don't have time for that. Let's see. I think I might even end, because I can't even get through any of this stuff. Let's see. And we go. Should I just zoom through the weaknesses so that it's somewhat balanced? Is it time?
So it's 10:30.
Okay. Oh dear.
Yeah.
Well, anyway. So those are some of the outtakes and the takeaways.